everybody. We are live from Boonville, Missouri, at my little dining room office. And sorry I missed class on Monday, but I'm right in the middle of testing for Module 2 for Human Anatomy and my other class, Human Physiology, at State Fair Community College. So if you hear pings and dings, that's students that are emailing me essay test results. Good morning, Linda, and I'm going to call you when I get done. So away we go. I'm going to recap. We're right in the middle of a deep dive into Dr. Jason Fung's book, The Obesity Code, that was published in 2016. It's very relevant and becomes more relevant over time. The fasting method is his Facebook group where people come together. It's called the fasting method. It's also the name of his website, where people come together and support each other while they go through a weight loss journey. So lots of information, nothing really rude, pretty much. Occasionally you'll have somebody that says something snarky on there, but for the most part this is a group of 135,000 people that are following the information I'm talking to you about in the last couple of weeks and having amazing results. So they have before and after pictures, quite a few actually. Very motivating place to go. So it's the fasting method on Facebook, and this information comes from Dr. Fung's book, The Obesity Code. So let's recap what we've been talking about the last 2 weeks. Number one, so this is facts on weight gain and obesity. And so not everybody that's overweight is obese, but overweightedness in the U.S. is about 70% of adults, and I can't give you the number on adolescents, but it's becoming more and more of a problem. So the recap. Number one, your body acts as a thermostat. It's physiology, homeostasis. You're trying to get back to a set point. So it's not a caloric scale, it's a set body weight. And if you put more calories in, your body will expend more energy to get back to that body set weight. And if you take less calories in, you get a reduction in energy output, so that you will gain weight back to your set body weight. So your body has a thermostat for body weight. It has nothing to do with calories. Number two, obesity is a hormonal condition. It is not a caloric imbalance. So if you go back the last 2 weeks, you can see actually a class on each one of these points. Number three, insulin and cortisol are major hormonal drivers of weight gain. Insulin being more important than cortisol. So if you're stressed out, you're going to gain weight. Number four, exercise is not important for weight loss. So that is called the caloric restriction and increase in exercise that you've heard for years and years and years from nutritionists, doctors, friends, family, etc. Sets you up for a guilt complex. So reducing calories in, caloric restriction, and increased exercise does nothing for weight loss. Okay? So we're going to go back to the cause or etiology of obesity. Okay? So we've explored why caloric reduction is as the primary mode for weight loss model. So the calories in, calories out theory is wrong. So we've talked about that 2 weeks ago. We know that if we give people insulin or they have a higher cortisol level, they will gain weight. And when you take those two hormones away, they will lose weight. So we're going to focus on insulin for the rest of this class, especially in the second half. So if we know that insulin causes obesity, you want to know what causes increasing insulin levels. So one of my medical directors that I work with as a health coach has grabbed onto this idea and asked me a week or a week and a half ago, should I be doing fasting insulin levels on people that are having trouble losing weight? The answer is yes. You do it fasting, and the goal is to have an insulin level after you've fasted, less than 20, and the lower the better. Okay, so you want to know what causes elevated insulin levels in the first place. Well, eating does it, right? So the other thing that you hear me harp on is carbohydrates. Okay, so let's explore that a little bit. So the most obvious thing that would cause a sustained elevation, what everybody thinks, of insulin is the fattening carbohydrates, so refined grains and sugars. Okay, they're highly refined, they raise blood sugars quickly, they raise blood levels of insulin quickly, they tend to cause weight gain and obesity. So that's the carbohydrate insulin hypothesis. It's the basis of the Atkins diet and the ketogenic diet, so very low carbohydrate diets. So it becomes fairly obvious that this theory may be wrong, or at least incomplete. Okay, so think about Asians, and I don't want to, there's lots of people that eat rice, but rice is a carbohydrate, and a lot of Asian people eat a lot of rice. Okay, so East Asian people tend to eat much more rice compared to North Americans, and most of it is white rice, so that's a refined carbohydrate. Okay, so you would expect that people in China that eat lots of white rice, and this is going back to a study in the 1990s, would be extremely obese. The thing is, they're not. So Chinese people don't tend to be obese. They have very low obesity rates in China, a little bit more since the 2000s when they westernized their diet. Okay, so westernization of diets has become more popular in the last 20 years or so. So if you look at a study that is called Nutrient Intakes of Middle-Aged Men and Women in China, Japan, United Kingdom, and United States in the late 1990s, it's called the INTERMAP study. They did a 24-hour dietary recall and 24-hour urine samples, and compared the diets of 4 groups of people from those 4 countries. The total carbohydrate intake in China was way higher than the other 3 nations. So if that carbohydrate insulin hypothesis was correct, then you would predict an outbreak and huge amounts of obesity in China, which is not true. So apparently something else is going on. So that while the total carbohydrate intake was high, the intake of sugar was very low compared to the rest of the world, the other 3 countries. So there appears to be something specific to sugar, which is poison. Yeah, it's as addictive as heroin, that causes obesity more than other carbohydrates. And then if you look at Japan, the total carbohydrate in Japan was not higher, but sugar intake was much lower than either the United States or the United Kingdom. And Japan's had very low rates of obesity until they started westernizing their diet. Okay, and then one other major difference in refined carbohydrate intake. So East Asians tend to take most of their carbohydrates as rice. Western societies take their carbohydrates as refined wheat and corn products. So it's possible that rice, even though it's a refined carbohydrate, tends to cause less weight loss than wheat. Okay? And then there are some that postulate that the wheat that we currently eat is different than what was originally grown, so refining wheat. Okay? So, so what you can say is that at this point, just saying that you should get rid of carbohydrates in your diet will tend to cause weight loss is basically incomplete. It may not be completely false, but it doesn't seem to be completely true. Okay, you can look at primitive societies, unrefined 70% carbohydrate dietary intake, and studies on some of those primitive societies have shown fasting insulin rates less than the 5th percentile. So on the bell curve, Gaussian distribution. So 70% unrefined carbohydrates, fasting insulin levels below the 5th percentile. So it seems that low insulin levels correlate with low weight gain and obesity rates. And it's not completely clear that carbohydrate intake is the primary cause of insulin levels or higher insulin levels. Okay, people in Okinawa, they eat lots of sweet potatoes, but they are some of the longest lived people on the planet. If you look up their life length of their life, Okinawa for years has been known as long-lived people. I think their average length of life is like 88 years, I think. So the link from insulin to obesity appears to be the deal. So if you give people insulin, you will cause weight gain, and taking insulin away, that will lead to weight loss. So it's the link from carbohydrates to insulin levels that seems to be incomplete or not fleshed out. Okay, so there's lots of things that can lead to insulin increases, lots of things that can lead to a decrease in insulin. So it's not that the carbohydrate insulin link is wrong, it's just not a complete thought. So the notion that carbohydrates drive insulin levels to be higher is not quite correct. So we need to know what causes the increases and decreases in insulin. So we need to talk about insulin resistance. We need to talk about meal timing and when you eat, and talk about fasting. And then we're going to talk about diabetes as well. We'll talk about starch. We'll talk about fibers. We'll talk about vinegar. We'll talk about fructose and sugars in more details. I did a whole class just on the difference between high fructose corn syrup and table sugar. And then we'll look at weight as well. Okay? So, how does insulin work? So insulin is a hormone that is released from your pancreatic islet cells from the pancreas in response to food. So certain foods, specifically refined carbohydrates, tend to increase insulin levels more than others. Protein will increase insulin levels as well. Dietary fats, and I'm talking about natural fats, have the least effect of increasing blood sugars and insulin levels. So as we eat, our insulin level is released, our blood sugars go up from the eating, leading to the release of insulin from the pancreas. And so when we eat a meal, we are ingesting and taking in more food energy than we're going to be using immediately. So insulin tells our body to move this glucose out of the bloodstream and store it for use later on. And one of the ways that sugar is stored is glycogen, which is glycogen in the liver. It's a string of glucose molecules that can be built up and taken down, so you can convert glucose to glycogen to glucose and back again, back and forth and back and forth. So there's only so much glycogen that can be stored in the liver, and after that, excess carbohydrates are turned into fat, so they're stored. So fat is harder to access compared to glucose or glycogen, but you pretty much have an unlimited supply of fat. Okay, that doesn't mean I'm saying you're fat, but you have fat throughout your body. And so insulin is one of the prime hormones that promote fat storage. So there's several different ways that you can store fat. So subcutaneous, which you can see, and then visceral or organ fat, which you can't see. And it's the visceral fat, there's the dinging, one of my students is emailing me, probably an essay test. It's the visceral fat that's the problem, and you can't see it. Okay, so like I said in my prep from 30 minutes ago, glycogen and glucose is like the cash you carry around or your checking account with a debit card or a checkbook if you still have one. I haven't had a checkbook for 10 years. So you put money in, you take it out, pretty easy. Okay, it's easily accessed, you only have a certain amount. And then fat is like the money that you put in your savings account, a mutual fund, your IRA. It's harder to get to. It's harder to get to that money. And if you have enough money, you have much more storage of money in those types of financial things than money you're carrying around in your wallet. hopefully you have more money saved than you're carrying around in your wallet. Okay, so that explains the difficulty with trying to decrease fat stores over time. So access to the IRA or a savings account or a mutual fund is limited. You can't just walk in and just, or you can't, I mean, you have to go to the bank, or you have to convert funds to cash, et cetera, et cetera. So that means stored fat is more difficult to burn. Okay, so to get at that money takes some effort. To get at stored fat takes some effort, and you can only access stored fat once your glycogen stores are depleted. Okay, so if you had an empty wallet or you had an empty checking account, you would access funds from your savings account, your mutual fund, maybe your IRA. All right. So fat storage is pretty normal. It's physiologic. We eat, insulin goes up, insulin stores sugar as glycogen in the liver. Insulin also turns on fat production in the liver. So that's called hepatic de novo lipogenesis. Okay, hepatic liver de novo there, lipogenesis, creation of fat. That's the breakdown of the term. Okay, so now you have new fat. What are you going to do? What's going to happen with it? So it can be oxidized. You can use it for energy. And so since you have a higher insulin level, that doesn't happen because you have lots of energy from your glycogen and the glucose from the meal that you just had. Second, you can export fat from the liver to other parts of your body. Okay, so it can be sent to the visceral fat around organs. It can be sent to the pancreas. It can be sent under the skin as subcutaneous fat. And third, fat can be stored in the liver itself. Okay, if that gets out of control, that's called non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. Okay, and then insulin is also responsible for turning off the conversion of glycogen to sugar. So insulin is suppressing new glucose production in the liver, known as gluconeogenesis. And so since insulin is telling your body to store sugar, you want to turn off the sugar burning process. And so after you've finished eating and digesting, blood sugars start to drop, insulin levels also drop, and so the absence of eating is called fasting. You're either eating or you're fasting. Okay? And so if you're fasting, the drop in insulin signals your body to start using glycogen in the liver, so your checking account versus your cash. So think of glucose as the cash you're carrying in your purse or your wallet, and then glycogen is in your checking account. It's a little bit harder to access, and then the fat is in your savings account, mutual fund, whatever. And so that stored sugar is now released into the bloodstream for use by your muscles, your brain, and other organs. That's called burning fat. It's called glycogenolysis. And it happens during the night, assuming you're not eating throughout the night. So then fat storage goes in reverse. So that's normal. We've not eaten. Insulin's released when we eat. If we're not eating, stored sugar is taken from the liver, sent out to the body for energy. Fat is burned to release energy and sent out to the body if there's not enough stored sugar. So this happens every day. It's physiology, it's homeostasis, it's maintenance. So if you eat, you store sugar and fat. If you don't eat, you burn sugar and burn fat. So let's say you eat 3 meals a day, 7 to 7, 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. So that's a balance, 12 hours of eating, 12 hours of fasting. Remember, life is all about balance, okay? So if you have a sustained elevation of blood insulin levels, you will tend to gain fat. And if insulin levels are always high, our bodies believe or behave like we're always eating, storing sugar, storing fat. So we turn on the machinery to increase glycogen storage after we've burned up our cash, our glucose. And after this fills up, then we start to move some of this excess energy to fat stores. So there's an imbalance between feeding and fasting. And if you're imbalanced between feeding and fasting, you will gain weight, increase fat store, and eventually create obesity. Okay, so eating by itself, though, does not lead to sustained high insulin levels. So let's assume you have 3 meals a day and no snacks. Okay, so you eat breakfast at 7 a.m., dinner at 7 p.m., lunch at noon if you want. So you have a balance of 12 hours of eating time and 12 hours of fasting time. So there's increased insulin balanced by decreased insulin during fast. And if we increase the peaks of insulin by eating lots of refined carbohydrates, it would still be balanced by the fasting period. Okay? So back 50 years ago when I was growing up, I'm 60. So in the 1950s and 1960s, United States citizens, people in this country, ate plenty of pasta. They had Wonder Bread, white bread. I mean, how many people have had peanut butter sandwiches on Wonder Bread? there were Oreo cookies, there were Milky Ways, there were Snickers bars. Sugar intake was high. People didn't drink Diet Coke; they drank Coca-Cola or Pepsi. They drank full sugar until they added, now that was sugar, until they added 1972 high fructose corn syrup. So plenty of fat and carbohydrates being taken in by Americans, but we didn't have an epidemic of obesity. Okay, so food choices, there's really two questions we think about: what to eat. Should we eat high carb, low carb, high fat, low fat, high protein, low protein? Should we eat whole grain and more fiber? What we forget to ask is, when should we eat? So meal timing plays a huge role in physiology and in the development of weight gain and obesity. So back in the 50s and 60s, we were eating 3 meals per day with no snacks. Okay? Your mother said, no snacks, it'll ruin your dinner. I've heard it. So 3 meals a day. I mean, I grew up eating 3 meals a day. I'd have a bowl of cereal, and I would have a peanut butter and jelly sandwich at lunch, and then, or whatever the Catholic school was feeding us, which was frequently peanut butter and jelly, or peanut butter and chili, which is wonderful if you haven't done that. And then whenever mom or dad made at night, my dad cooked quite a bit. But more and more people over the last 50 years have been told by nutritionists and doctors, and even diabetics, to eat 6 times a day. So we've gone from 3 times a day to 6 times a day. And I saw one study where the average American is really eating about 9 to 10 times a day from about 7 a.m. until about 11 p.m. So think about your bedtime snack if you do that. So you're constantly stimulating your pancreas to release insulin because your blood glucose goes up when you eat. So sugar storage and fat storage gets revved up. Okay, the peaks of insulin may not be as high, but you have continuous stimulation of insulin release. So if you get a higher insulin release if you eat a huge meal compared to a snack, but we've lost the balance between fed and fasted states, which is, so that's an insulin dominance throughout the day. And then the fasted state is insulin deficiency, which is a bad way to say it, but low insulin levels. Okay, so 50, 60, 70 years ago, 12 hours of feeding, 12 hours of fasting. Okay, 3 meals a day, no snacks. Snacking's going to ruin your dinner. Low levels of obesity in the 1950s and 60s, and now we've come to the point where we can eat pretty much wherever we are and whenever we want. So if you want to eat in your car, you can do it. You can go through the drive-thru. You can eat at a movie theater. You can eat at your desk. You can have snacks on your every place. So whenever you feel the urge to put something in your mouth, you can eat. So now we have 16 to 18 hours a day of feeding with only 6 to 8 hours of fasting. Nutritionists, doctors, etc., diabetic specialists have told people to eat all the time. So 3 meals a day, 3 snacks between, that's 6, and then that's between the meals, and then you have a bedtime snack or maybe a mid-evening snack. So next thing you know, at some point, people have eaten 10 times. So typical school schedule: eat breakfast, have a mid-morning snack, have lunch, have an after-school snack, have dinner, snack between a soccer game or softball or baseball or whatever sport, snack at bedtime. So that's 7 times a day. So that's the current advice. And now we have an epidemic of obesity. So we will continue to explore this. Hey, yeah, peanut butter and chili. The other one is lasagna and cinnamon rolls, if you haven't done that. Hi, Wendy. So we'll continue down this rabbit hole. We're probably going to do this for another week or two because it's so important. So the information from this particular physician and this book is hugely important and explains a lot about why people have difficulty losing weight and then maintaining that weight loss even if they accomplish weight loss. So I'm going to go grade some more essay tests and put some more scores in and do some health coaching. And I should be on Friday, and I keep playing around with the times, but they're always up, and they're on YouTube at Health Without Risk. Everything, and they're categorized. So if you want to go back and review something I've talked about, they're categorized. So the videos are put in different categories, but they're all there in one place. YouTube, Health Without Risk. I'll talk to you Friday. I'm going to go hopefully pass all my students. You'll have a great day. We've got rain coming to central Missouri for the next, probably through the weekend. So have a great day. Talk to you later. Bye.